Howdy folks, Shell Presto here, and today I've got a special holiday treat for you. So some of you folks may know that I and my husband are authors. While our books always have a good helping of conflict, and since we write heroic adventure fiction, action, and adventure, I thought it would be fun to just flex my muscles and write a more intimate, calm, short story to get in the Christmas spirit. I picked up some holiday scrapbook paper that I thought looked cool for inspiration, and I'll be drawing the characters who appear in the story as I read. Now, I'll be drawing the characters in formal wear, which is not actually what they're wearing in the story. It takes place at a casual party on Christmas Eve, where they're just wearing jeans and sweaters or t-shirts. Nothing special. But some accessories in the drawing tie into the story, so it's not completely out of the blue. The big thing is that these characters are superheroes. This story deals with their everyday alter egos and not at all secret identities. But just so you have a point of reference, the characters in the story, Meteora and Atomic Ranger, look like this when they're on a mission. This story will be told in two parts. This is the first part, where I draw Meteora. The second part will follow shortly and feature my drawing Atomic Ranger. Then I'll put them both together on that scrapbook paper background. It'll be fun times. The drawing for the second part is already done, so I just have to finish editing that video. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell to be sure you don't miss part 2. Anyway, two notable notes about the artwork before I start reading. Number 1. This is the first time I've used Bristol board instead of mixed media paper for a Copic marker drawing in a long time. I thought it was a good move because Bristol board absorbs less ink and therefore saves you money on your marker ink. I regretted it because I realized too late that the way I blend depends on the paper being able to suck up a ton of ink. The ink actually started laying on the page in little puddles at a few points, then drying weird and shiny. I pretty much fixed it, and the casual observer may not even notice. My husband didn't until I told him, and he looks at my art more than anyone. But I wanted to warn you, if you like to blend wet in wet with markers, you may want to stick with hardier, eager to drink up ink paper. I'll be doing so in the future. Number 2, there's a jump where the already inked lines in Danica's dress get darker. That's because I retraced them with a cobalt blue pen over the sepia to make the lines cooler so they jive with the purple I used to color her dress later. I figured you folks wouldn't want to see me ink this twice. So, without further ado, here we go. Alan Adams had always been content to go unnoticed. On the farm or in the Air Force, it was his experience that the nameless and the faceless were usually found doing the most important work. Being useful was what mattered, not recognition. So it was ironic and uncomfortable that he should be standing in a room full of the most prominent superheroes in the world. It was a small group. This afternoon party on Christmas Eve was just for the active members of the Challenger Foundation. Alan had exchanged the obligatory pleasantries, but his life didn't make for pleasant small talk. And so he planted himself against a wall and focused on the sweet, emotive sighing of the violin in Christmas Concerto for Strings, played unaccompanied and without the aid of instruments by his teammate, the psychic maestro known as Amp. Amp and Ephemera, Battle Axe, Meteora, Hydroman, and the Promethean. That was the way of the room. People so talented, so famous, so beautiful, that they had more than one name. There were no grunts, no nameless and faceless rank and file here.
Not even the Atomic Ranger.
Alan thought. He was the newest member of the Foundation, collecting checks for barely 8 months and still a household name. His new glow-in-the-dark face had been on TV and in newspapers and magazines more than he cared to think about. It was a surreal realization that if Alan Adams didn't belong in this room, the Atomic Ranger belonged on this team. Alan looked across the room at his boss, nodded his appreciation at the musical talents of his adopted son. The Promethean raised his glass in acknowledgement, then turned his attention back to the concert. Matteo Mancini, the Promethean, was a literal living legend. He was the man who created the Challenger Foundation, an 800-something-year-old alchemist who beat back the Martian hordes alongside the greatest heroes of an older age. The Promethean defined what it was to be an important man, and he didn't saddle his team with dead weight. If Alan was stuck being a weapon, there wasn't a more trustworthy man to decide where to point him. And right there, Alan realized, was the other reason he didn't belong here. He was a gun on the rack, more weapon than person. Technically, he was a cyborg, still a creature of flesh and blood, but metallic yellow flesh made of extraterrestrial chitin. He had a bionic leg and a metal spine and a nuclear isomer battery in his gut to power it all. The lunatic science that had augmented him had maybe taken away more than it had given. What right had he to relate to real people with real human connections beyond tragedy? To heroes, and not hardware. In the field, Atomic Ranger was right at home, but that feeling faded when the punch-outs were over and the crossfire ceased. Here in this room, Alan was the only one with no binding ties, no long history of kinship and humor and love. He had fought alongside his teammates for a little while, come to respect them. He thought he would lay down his life to protect them, and they called him their friend, but he didn't know them, and they didn't know him. He did that to himself, of course. Everyone else was almost jarringly open about themselves. Even before his transformation, Alan had never been one to offer up his opinion, let alone his life story, unless it was keenly relevant. And mostly, people didn't pry. Except for Meteora. Danica Novak never stopped chipping at his walls. She started asking him questions when he was new and overwhelmed, and every time he answered, the next answer came easier. And as he watched her walk over to him, he knew that she had picked up the hammer and chisel again. It was because of her intense perseverance that she became the only teammate he really knew. She was years younger than him, but already a veteran. As Meteora, she was a human rocket whose first punch was often the only one necessary. Her father was the hypergolic man, an old ally of the Foundation and, as she often pointed out to Alan, a man who had volunteered to be turned into a living weapon. That was probably the reason why Danica was undaunted by his standoffishness. "Parties are more fun if you talk to the people at them, Alan," she said.
I never have much to say. The most interesting things I do involve punching, lifting, and shooting lasers. And I never do it without most of the people in this room present.
Danica sighed and sipped the last of her rum and coke. "That's why you're supposed to go out and do things between missions. If you'd go out to a movie, you could talk about that."
You know I can't go to theaters, Danica. I glow in the dark.
It was true, but he knew the real reason he couldn't go out to a movie with her was because they'd end up sitting entirely too close to each other. "So we should sit in the back." And there it was, the ambiguous line. These days, Alan was having a hard time telling whether Danica was hitting on him or if he was reading his own subconscious desires into it. He liked the idea of her being as attracted to him as he was to her. He could clearly and all too easily picture his younger, wholly human self laying in the back of his pickup truck, a quilt, a six-pack, and Danica at his side. There was no other girl he'd want to watch the stars with than Meteora. The thought made the memory of lost body parts ache.
Yes, Danica, I would love to sit in the back row of a movie theater with you. Which is exactly why we will never see one together,
he thought. She leaned against the wall a few feet from him, arching her back like she was in a photo shoot, and complained to the ceiling. "I wish I could offer to get you a drink to loosen you up a little. But I'm guessing alcohol doesn't work on you anymore, does it?"
Not anymore, no.
He wished it did. 1 year ago, Alan Adams was missing a leg, among other things, and was trying mightily to use the other. He had moved back to his parents' farm and was wallowing in the loss of his dream to save up enough money from the Air Force to triumphantly return home, buy part or all of his parents' land, find a wife, and have 10 kids so he'd never need to hire a farmhand. He saw the bottom of many a bottle back then, and even if it didn't change anything, even if it made him more miserable, it had been a comfort. Now he had the raw strength to put a yoke over his own back and plow a field without breaking a sweat. But all his dreams were even further away, and even if his new body was more comfortable, he'd lost a lot of comforts. That was what made Danica Novak so dangerous. You should walk me to my car.
You can't possibly feel unsafe walking to your car, Meteora.
Atomic Ranger had to suppress a smile as he said it. A less prepared man would have easily fallen for that one. Whether her intentions were to have him alone in the parking lot or simply to get him to drive her to her parents' house. She had been trying to get him to come to Christmas Eve dinner since the moment malls started playing Christmas music. She would not be content with a simple goodbye. He called her out on it.
Besides, weren't you just drinking?
Her lips, a shade lighter than the red Christmas sweater that hugged her, pouted. She must have thought her plan was perfect, because she had no defense or backup. He covered his mouth to hide his amusement. She wasn't good at being sneaky. Her real strength, her ability to give of herself, was astounding. At times he wondered, if she had been in his life after the bombing ripped him apart, would he have still made that deal with the devil for his new leg? She was the sort of woman he could see sacrificing her future to build him back up. She would have had more to work with then. At least everything that was left of him after the accident was still human. Between his nuclear battery and his skin grafted with extra or ultra-terrestrial DNA, he felt like he had more in common with toasters or Martians or light bulbs. But sometimes he didn't feel that way with Danica. He could also, all too easily, picture her destroying herself for him now. If he didn't like her so damn much, he'd be happy to let her do it. He felt like an unstable molecule around her, drawn to her calming aura, but knowing they'd make a poisonous compound. However, it was Christmas, and she was a girl who wanted a boyfriend but didn't have one, which was ridiculous because she was Meteora, America's super sweetheart since the day she joined the Challenger Foundation. If she wanted any other man, she'd have him. But she was suspicious of any guy who saw her in a magazine before he talked to her, and that described all men with eyes. And maybe, just maybe, she was a girl holding back with any other man because she was standing here with him, barking up a wrong and radioactive tree. Still, she was a girl who deserved to know how special she was. He couldn't deny her that. A man couldn't come back from losing everything: his leg, any future children, his autonomy, his humanity, his parents, his sister, on his own. And God didn't make girls like Danica to be lonely. And so he orbited her carefully, vigilant so as not to be pulled in. Finally, she rerouted. I had something I didn't want to give you in front of everyone else, she said quietly.
Are we really doing this?
Alan asked. He tried to make himself sound mildly stern to rib her. He didn't realize that he usually sounded stern, so he had overdone it. Danica winced, hiding her bright blue eyes behind a wave of blonde hair. She feigned ignorance. What?
Exchanging gifts.
It's okay if you didn't get me one, she said, still not looking at him. But he caught her eyes starting to get a little glossy as she blinked. He chuckled, not because anything was funny, but because he was trying to lighten the mood. This girl really wanted him alone, and he was really afraid of being alone with this girl.
I got everyone a gift. I ordered True Treat Pop. It's bottled in Nebraska, and the shipping was so much anyway that I just got 6-packs for everyone.
She forced a little smile. That's nice, Alan. I really appreciate that. I got everyone something little too. She swallowed and squared her shoulders. But I got you something else. and I really don't feel like it would be appropriate to give you a better gift in front of everyone.
No one would care.
He thought. Ephemera, Amp, and Hydroman had already made remarks in the past, wondering if they were dating. They weren't, but he was sure they'd expect to see them exchange gifts on Christmas Eve. He watched her carefully, measured that she had had just enough alcohol in her to be tipsy. If not for that, he could say, "Let's go out for some air." Sober Danica was charming and respectful. Tipsy Danica tried to be.
No,
He corrected himself.
still is.
It was his own fear stoking his perception of her unpredictability. How could he possibly stop himself if she ever grew bold enough to force her pomegranate lips on him? And why did he keep coming back to the possibility?
Because you double-crossed Path, and Path killed your parents. That's the entire reason you're here.
He reminded himself. He set his jaw. He was ready to be kind to Danica without being swept up in her current.
No one will bother us in the hallway.
He offered. He knew he sounded stern again, but he was giving her what she wanted, so she smiled at him and bounced a little as she led the way, stopping to grab a plain, dark green gift bag hung beneath her coat. He grabbed his coat and slid it on. "So is True Treat your favorite soda?" There was a lightness and lilt in her voice that only existed in a girl thrilled to learn something new about her crush.
No, actually. It's just different. I just got in the mood for it because
He had to stop himself from saying.
I'm crushingly homesick.
He couldn't even bring himself to say the words.
Dad loved it.
And she looked up at him with those knowing sky-blue eyes again, as if every time he lost the words, she was somehow reading his mind. Sometimes he felt like he must have been confusing her instead of disappointing her whenever he shrugged off her advances. Was it even possible for her to not know how he felt? He forced himself to think of Path again.
Because we'd get it around the holidays.
Mm-hmm. She hugged herself and leaned against the wall, looking up at him patiently, just barely smiling. It reminded him of someone waiting for a dog to own up to stealing a sandwich. But somehow, her expression was sweet instead of demeaning. He huffed a defeated laugh, turned to face the windows that looked out over Meridian Harbor, and leaned his back against the wall.
It was my dad's favorite pop. It's grapefruit flavored, so it's an acquired taste.
He didn't even know what else to say, but she got the information she wanted, he was sure. "You should come to my folks' place for Christmas Eve, Alan. We all had a good time at Thanksgiving. Dad likes you. He said you're welcome back any time." He didn't want to be a holiday staple at her house. That would make it all the harder on them when she inevitably got a boyfriend. But he did enjoy Thanksgiving considerably more than he figured he could. The invitation, like the woman offering it, was tempting.
I'll be fine. I'm sure the Promethean will be glad to have me along so he's not third-wheeling with Amp and Ephemera.
I'm sure he doesn't mind. I don't think the situation has been invented that can make Mateo feel awkward. She tilted her head, pushing a strand of long, blonde hair behind her ear, and flashed him an apple pie and baseball smile. "What if I said I'd miss you if you didn't come?" Alan quickly coughed into his fist. He didn't realize that it was something he only ever did when he wanted to change the subject, and that Danica knew it. For a man who barely needed to eat or drink, never got a sore throat, and for how often he needed to breathe being a subject of debate, what biological reason would he have to cough?
So you wanted to give me something?
She handed him the bag. It felt light in his hands, but then everything did nowadays. He reached past some red tissue paper, making it glow like a dim luminary as he did, and pulled out a packaged black button-down shirt. He stared at it for a long minute, unsure of how to feel about it. He was ambivalent toward the shirt itself. Alan's fashion concerns went as far as looking clean and kempt. But he was concerned about her buying him clothes.
Hell.
He thought.
Is this a girlfriend thing?
Danica noticed the delay. Is it too Mother Henish? She deflected, trying to downplay it. He found himself replying without thinking.
I don't know.
She stared out toward the setting sun, and in return it cast an orange tint over her already blushing cheeks. The last time you wore a suit, you had that light gray shirt on, and your chest was glowing through it, which made it look green. And then you had that bright red tie on, and, She was wringing her hands gently as she debated her word choice. Well, you sort of looked a bit like a stoplight. Alan huffed a laugh and shook his head.
Thanks, Danica. That's what I was going for.
I thought so. She stepped in front of him and picked up the package by its corners. This is a little thicker, so you shouldn't be able to glow through it. And there's a tie that'll go with your complexion better. He raised an eyebrow at that and dug through the bag again. It was a set, tie and handkerchief, both predominantly black, with neon yellow and ultraviolet purple stripes. He was sure it looked classy enough, but they were the sort of colors only she could pick. He wasn't keen to accentuate his bizarre features. You don't like it,
It's all right.
he said coolly.
I do appreciate it.
He was genuinely confused when the thought crossed his mind, because he thought they knew each other well.
You didn't expect me to get excited about clothes, did you?
She rocked on her heels and hummed. No, but the thing I got you that you'll like cost me $0.25, so I felt like I had to get you something else. He stared at her until she pointed at the bag. There was a thick, worn paperback. On its faded cover was an armor-clad barbarian with a too futuristic-looking sword fighting a humanoid pterodactyl. A small smile curved Alan's yellow lips.
Wow.
He said quietly. She was already wearing that knowing smile again when he looked back at her.
I'm surprised you remembered I needed this one.
It was painstakingly specific. Part 7 of a 9-book series he had otherwise completed, an out-of-print and unwanted by the general public gem he'd been looking for since before he had set foot in a barracks. He refused to order vintage books off the grid. Besides the threat of overpaying, combing used bookstores was one of his old habits he could still enjoy. I found it at a flea market.
This is really great, Danica. Thank you.
They stood there, both holding the bag, both staring over it at each other for a tiny eternity. It happened with them often. Alan was a quiet guy, and she valued that. And he liked looking at her, especially, he knew, because, at least at this point in her life, she only looked at him this way. He thought she must like his quiet presence or professionalism, or maybe she had bird with a broken wing syndrome. He could not have comprehended that she'd become so familiar with his bizarre appearance that she could look past the yellow glow and appreciate his sharp, wide jawline and muscular neck, or that she had a thing for stern gazes, and even more of a thing for soft gazes coming from men with stern gazes. Eventually, he broke away, placing the book back in the bag with a whispered,
Really great.
We're going to stop there at the halfway mark. You've undoubtedly noticed by now, but my husband helped out with Atomic Ranger's voice. Mike's great like that. I hope you enjoyed the story so far. Please let me know in the comments if you did, and especially if you'd like to see more story videos like this, because I know I had fun making it. As a reminder, these characters I read about today, Meteora and Atomic Ranger, are in the Challenger Foundation, the group of heroes featured in my and my husband's book series, Challenger Confidential. We've got one book already out in the series called Copper Knights and Granite Men. Atomic Ranger appears in that book, and both he and Meteora appear in future books in the series, which Mike and I have underway. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider picking up a physical or digital copy of Copper Knights and Granite Men on Amazon.com or through other online book retailers. Or, if you're not a reader, you could also leave me a tip directly through PayPal. The link to my tip jar is in the description. Also, if you've already read Copper Knights and Granite Men and are wondering, this story takes place a few years before the events in that book. Since this is an art video, I suppose I should say that in the end, that ink pulling problem with the paper happened on Danica's cheek, so she has more blush than I'd like. But I don't think it turned into a deal breaker. She still looks really pretty. The major problem was that I started with a blush that was a shade too dark in the first place. I bought a better color marker for the task since then, so I shouldn't have the same problem again. And though I do still recommend Bristol board for most marker illustrations, I personally am going to stick to mixed media paper in the future because I blend and layer the ink a heck of a lot. Oh, and here's the obligatory obvious statement, but if you're a kid or a clumsy adult, as I sometimes am, please get help using an X-Acto knife. They're really sharp and bad things can happen. This video is sped up. I very carefully spent 20 minutes cutting Danica out in real life. So that's it for me. Please consider subscribing if you don't want to miss out on the end of this story. I'm certainly hoping you stick around. And just as importantly, I hope you have an awesome day. Presto, over and out.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year, precious.
Now bring me some figgy pudding.
Yes, bring us some... Oh, no, figs are fruit, precious. I don't like fruit.
Well, there's cream in pudding, isn't there? Oh, I like cream. I eat fruit. Where's the fruit pudding? God, Algernon! Stop talking before your voice scares everyone away. No, I have a pretty voice. I have the perfect black cat voice. It's creepy. I'm leaving.
Don't leave me alone with him, precious.
Wait, where's the fruit pudding? You said there was fruit pudding.